In this video, we've got your full in-depth review of the Tamron 70-180 F2.8. As usual, breaking down everything to do with this lens to help you decide whether or not you should be buying it. Let's get started. So with the Tamron hitting the shelves, we finally have some competition for the old G Master. We will compare it a little bit because it is half the price, but if you want to see a full in-depth comparison video between these two, I'll link it up there for you. We're just going to focus on the Tamron in this video today, and here's some specs to get you going. If you haven't seen one of my videos before, my name's Stefan Malloch. I do a lot of photography and filmmaking news, reviews, and tutorials, so if you do enjoy this content and it helps you out, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And as usual now, we're going to dive right into the build and features of this lens. Okay, so let's have a look at the physical aspects of this lens, but also let's answer who this lens is for. It's not going to be a professional lens, although it can produce professional results. It just doesn't have the quality that you would expect, the durability, we'll say, of a professional lens. All you're going to get in the box is the lens itself and a lens hood, and a little bit of paperwork, of course. Now the first overall impression is decent. It is very similar to the 28-75 and the 17-28. It's not great, but it's adequate. It's a mainly plastic build measuring 7 5/8 inches long with the lens hood installed, 8 7/8 inches long fully extended, and just shy of 6 inches without. It's also very light for what it is, weighing just 810 grams or about 1 3/4 pounds. It's got a huge and grippy front zoom ring, which does extend as you zoom, but it does have an extremely nice short throw. The focus ring turns smoothly enough, and it's very reminiscent of the 17-28 and the 28-75, which does leave something to be desired when it comes to accuracy. The only button or switch that you'll find on this lens is a little zoom lock switch. And this is a little bit puzzling to me. Most lenses in this focal range and price do have image stabilization, and in this case Tamron has opted not to include it. A bit of a head scratcher. On the front you'll find 67mm filter threads, as well as Tamron's patented BBAR-G2 coating, which is said to help with ghosting and flare. On the back you'll find a metal mount, accompanied by a firm rubber gasket that's going to help with weather sealing. Looking at the build and features as a whole, I can't say that I'm overly impressed. However, this is a budget-friendly lens with a lot of features cut out to keep costs down, but there's just an essence of cheapness to it. From the lack of IS to the exposed screws, there's just something about it for me, and it feels like a step down compared to the other lenses in this series. I give it 3.5 stars. Next, let's talk about value. This lens filled a gaping hole and the only competition for the E-mount between the 70-200 f2.8 Sony G Master. At $1,200 American dollars, or half of the Sony equivalent, there's definitely tons of value, as you'll see here when we get into performance. There's also the comparable F4, which is still a bit more expensive, but all around I think this lens hit the sweet spot for a lot of people. It might not have the build quality and features of the G Master, but I think for the target market and the people actually buying this lens, it's going to be more than enough. Another thing for you to consider is the warranty. It's a 6-year warranty, extended to 10 years when you register online. Amazing! I give it 4.5 stars for value. Okay, so let's dive into performance, and this lens does perform very well across the board except for a few exceptions. Let's start by having a look at the lens's autofocus and the image stabilization, or lack thereof. Utilizing Tamron's new linear focus motors, the autofocus speed of this lens is incredible. It's lightning fast and does prioritize speed over accuracy, I find. In good light, you're not going to have a problem, but in backlit situations or less than perfect conditions, you might find it struggling and hunting just a bit. In decent light, where you're probably going to be shooting most of the time, you're not going to have any issues. The optics of this lens and the focusing capabilities are a little bit different than your typical lens. Using your autofocus, your minimum focus distance is 33.5 inches throughout the entire focal range. Switch to manual, however, to get down to 10.6 inches on the wide end with 1:2 magnification ratio capabilities to get macro-like shots. But do note that it only works on the wide end. Zooming in will bring your minimum focus distance back out to 33.5 inches. I'm really liking the near macro capabilities that Tamron's giving us with a lot of their lenses lately. Autofocus consistency, even with moving subjects, is actually quite good. Here's a series of 55 shots I took, pretty much bang on in every shot, so this lens is going to be great for action shots, for animals and wildlife even though it doesn't have too much reach, and of course family and events. It's going to shine when it comes to portraits as well, and its 9 aperture blades means that it can produce some incredibly beautiful bokeh. Here's an example of what you can expect in terms of stability. 180mm isn't crazy, but it's still far enough out there where you're going to have some trouble hand holding. In this case, I'm using my in-body image stabilization with my A7 III, but if you don't have it, this is what you can expect. For me, this is one of the biggest downsides of this lens, and I think it's expected at this price range and definitely at this focal range. Having IBIS is definitely going to help your experience, but overall, having IBIS as well as built-in image stabilization in your lens does make quite a big difference. And here's a comparison of what this looks like in terms of stills, and using the IBIS in my A7 III, you can see that it does make quite a dramatic difference when it comes to lower shutter speeds. Here it is at 1/50th of a second. And here's a few more examples. If you do have IBIS, you're going to be able to get away with it just fine, but having a lens like the G Master with built-in image stabilization is going to make it that much better. Now let's have a look at the sharpness and optics of this lens. Wide open at f2.8 at 70mm here, it's a great performance wide open, and in the center is good, the corners are good, it's just an all-around good performance. Stopping down to f4, however, you're going to get even more sharpness, and this is going to continue pretty much throughout the entire focal range. For me, this lens is best at about f8, and it's going to be great all the way down to about f11. After f11, you're going to start to see some noticeable softness in the corners, but a great performance. Now having a look at 180mm, it's pretty much the same story. Great in the center, and the corners are actually great as well. Stop down to f4 for a noticeable improvement, a little bit brighter, getting rid of some of that vignetting. And then stopping down to f5.6 and f8 is going to be about your sharpest here. A great performance pretty much all around. And after about f11, once again, you're going to start to notice some softness creep in. f16 being, well, not the greatest. All around though, optically this lens is fantastic. A quick look at the distortion and vignetting of this lens reveals that it's very well controlled, just a tiny bit of both. With a simple profile correction you can fix it right up. Having a look at the difference there, not much to look at all at 70mm. And here at 180mm, it's pretty much the same story. A little bit more distortion, but it can be fixed up right with that profile correction or stopping down. Very well controlled all across the board. Here's a few more photos of my travels, and I wanted to address the focal length. I find it a little bit funny. That missing 20mm for me does make a difference. When you buy a telephoto lens, you buy it for the reach. For me, I would have much preferred an 80-200 or an 80-210 or something, much like the 28-75. I would have preferred a little bit more on the long end, as this is what we buy these lenses for. Having said that, we do have the somewhat macro capabilities, which is a cool feature, so I guess it kind of evens out. But don't rule out crop mode if you're shooting on something like the A7 III. Let me know your thoughts on the limited focal range down in the comments, and as far as performance goes, it is a solid performer, and I give it 4.5 stars. So wrapping up guys, I'm really happy that we finally have some more competition in the 70-200 f2.8 arena. That was a big hole that's now been filled by Tamron, and hopefully in the future, other brands like Sigma. It doesn't tick all the boxes, but definitely a great value lens for somebody on a budget, or somebody just looking for a great performing mid-range lens. As a whole, I gave it a solid 4 stars. I also like to rate things on a scale from never think about again to consider to definitely buy. And if you're looking for a 70-200 or somewhere in their equivalent, you're not too concerned about the lack of image stabilization, and you're on a decent budget looking for a great value lens, well, I'd strongly consider this one. There you go, guys. There's my full review on the Tamron 70-180. I hope I've answered all your questions and you liked this video. And if you did, consider hitting that like and subscribe button and drop all your questions and your comments down below. I'll leave affiliate links if you're ready to buy this lens down there as well. And like always, make mistakes, be yourself, and get out there and take some more pictures. See you next time.